We'll go ahead and get started. And first of all, thank you everybody for taking an hour or so out of your Thursday evening to join us. We're here this evening to have our consultant that is working on the City Hall redevelopment. OHM Advisory Group and Studio 8 are collaborating on this endeavor on behalf of the city. And your input is vital. We're still in the fact-finding stage. Ultimately, we have several milestones to engage the community along the way. This is about a 4.5-year project at this point in time. So we invite you to share your thoughts, ideas, use the chat box as needed, and we'll capture all the ideas you have and give a reasonable amount of time for you to ask questions. Before I turn it over to Matt Taylor to lead us through this conversation, as always, when we're on a meeting of this nature, please keep your microphone on mute. And when it's time to weigh in, just unmute and speak up, and we'll hopefully have a lively discussion. Thank you. Take it away, Matt.
All right, thank you, Vernon, and thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight. I know 6 o'clock isn't always the most convenient time. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's a little awkward. So we really appreciate everybody taking their some of their personal time to join us this evening and talk about City Hall. Before we get started, I want to introduce a few of our team members that are here on the project with us tonight as well. Anna Ruth Kimbrough is my business partner at Studio 8 Design, and she's going to be helping watch the chat box as well. So if you all have questions and comments as we go through tonight's discussion, feel free to chime in there, and we're going to stop at intervals to talk about questions and everybody's feedback. But that's another good way if you don't want to talk on camera, or we run short on time, that we do value everybody's feedback and look for it there. Matt Edwards with OHM is here with us as well, and Gary Vogren with Kaiser Vogren Design is here from our team also. If there's others, they're off my screen, and forgive me for not introducing them. So, but I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. We've got a little presentation we'll walk through, and to introduce the project to everybody. And here we go. Okay, do y'all see the public engagement slide there on the screen? Here, as I mentioned, we have a large team working on this first phase of the project with us. As Vernon introduced us so kindly, OHM and Studio 8 are both architects partnering on this job. OHM is also providing civil engineering for the project. Brand ID is our interior designer. Kaiser Vogren Design is our landscape architect. The parent company is providing pre-construction services and will help us budget things as some of the master plan ideas start to come together. Genesis Engineering is our structural and MEP engineer. SRMC is providing security consulting services for planning. Henderson Engineers is helping us with lighting, all kinds of technology stuff, AV and low voltage. And then this is a LEED project. We're aiming for LEED Silver from a sustainability standpoint, and optimized design. Some of you may know Ken Scalf. Ken is our consultant for the LEED aspect of the project. Real quickly, here's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about the master plan design process, the need for a new City Hall, the role of City Hall in the community, establishing master plan goals, supporting uses that might be factored into the project, and architectural style. In the design process, we started last fall, lots of discussions and meetings with the city to work out a work plan for this first phase and project what the work was going to be to complete the project. We are right here in public engagement round 1, this bright red bar, as you can see, right in May of 2021. We will go through a report from this round with some preliminary master plan ideas. do another round of public engagement in September, between September and November, present these to BOMA for their approval, hopefully, then move on into the schematic design phase in 2022, next spring. And then as you see this squiggle line here, as Vernon said, we have a couple of years still ahead of us before we complete the project and are thinking that's probably going to happen in spring of 2026. So I believe all of you are familiar with downtown Franklin and certainly know the site. We are demolishing the existing City Hall Mall building. It's a building that has lived its life, but it's one of the most prominent sites the city has right in downtown Franklin. The existing Second Avenue parking garage will remain. It's working great. We have the Pull-Tight Theater will also remain, and we want to be sensitive to the historic structure of it and the greenhouse here on the corner. The dotted line indicates all of the boundary of the property and that the city owns for the project. Obviously, we have the courthouse, the square, 231 Public Square, and Main Street running from the east to the west here. Questions for consideration. These are going to be the overall questions that we want y'all thinking about throughout this presentation. And we're going to stop at intervals for your feedback. But why does Franklin need a new city hall? I think that's pretty obvious probably to most of you, but we're going to touch on that. What role should City Hall play in the community? We'll explore some ideas there and look for your feedback. What's most important to you when considering the development of a city hall in downtown Franklin? What type of supporting uses do you envision on this block in addition to a city hall? And what type of architecture would you like to see? The need for a new city hall, I think from the faces I recognize, all of you have been in City Hall for one reason or another. It's a mall building built in the early 70s. The city moved into it in 1981 after the mall failed and the building sat vacant for a few years. It's not particularly well suited for the operation of a city hall. The wide hallways really don't get used. They're inefficient space. They serve to disconnect the different departments from coordinating and collaborating together, especially when you think about departments like building and neighborhood services and planning and codes, where a lot of things overlap in the design and development community. The building's not particularly easily accessible to the public in terms of some of the current accessibility code requirements on different sides of the building. We do have multiple entry points, which is a security concern as we're now in the year 2021. We read about security stories every day in the news. The mall building is not particularly inviting or welcoming. It shows its 70s architecture with a lack of windows. The scale is different from everything else on the square and Main Street. It doesn't promote health and well-being for the building occupants, the city staff and the employee and visitors, with a lack of windows because of the long solid brick walls. And the building has lived its life. It's in a state of disrepair. The city spends a lot of money on repairs for roof leaks, outdated technology, outdated systems for the air conditioning and other concerns, safety and security, as we mentioned, multiple points, and just the ongoing maintenance costs. So moving on, let's talk about the role of City Hall in the community. What role should City Hall play? We have been doing a lot of case studies. City halls are not built every day, especially in historic settings like this. In historic downtowns of the scale of Franklin, you tend to find older buildings like we have with the courthouse that have been saved and preserved and served that role. Well, we have the courthouse, but we also have City Hall flanking 3rd Avenue there. So as we've looked at case studies for other buildings that have been built, you'll see some new buildings, you'll see some old buildings. What we're looking at are concepts, not so much style. So keep that in mind as we look through some of these images. We have talked about what they do and how they serve their community. So they can provide places for the community to gather beyond just the City Hall functions, beyond board meetings and planning commission meetings, that beyond paying your bills. They can embrace neighborhood partnerships, and we have a very active community with Franklin Tomorrow and the Heritage Foundation, and so many other great organizations, Downtown Neighborhood Association in Franklin, that all serve our community and work together in different ways. We've talked about a museum component that could involve public art or historic display telling the story of Franklin and the story of downtown. Visitor Information Center with a prominent spot on the square. As visitors do come to downtown Franklin, they want to gather information for the different things they can see that might be on Main Street, but they might extend beyond Main Street to some of our parks and other historic amenities. We talked about an educational component for the community and really providing something for all ages. So these photos, there's a couple of examples of what this looks like. In Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, which is really a suburb of Charleston, they have historic markers and exhibits telling the story of Mount Pleasant, and it has a great historic village downtown. This is a new city hall, but they've incorporated the public art in these exhibits here. In Philadelphia, you can see the information center is a welcoming kiosk. It helps to point people in the right direction. It's easily visible from the communicating corridor of their facility. Buda, Texas built a new city hall a few years ago. They have a very open communicating lobby that serves to host gatherings by itself, with beyond what a boardroom might do or a public meeting room. The interior of the building overlooks what happens in the lobby, so it keeps everybody connected within the building and in the activities that are going on and the work that's being done. And Boston, Massachusetts is an older city hall. It's obviously a different style than what we would probably look for in downtown Franklin, but as they've done some major extensive renovations in the plaza that fronts City Hall and the interior, where they've tried to make it more welcoming and created spaces where you don't need a conference room. You can come in and meet with someone before a meeting or have a place to wait, grab a cup of coffee, wait before your item comes up on an agenda for another meeting. The stairs are very open and connect the lobby up to the upper floors and provide spaces for people to pass each other and communicate with each other. So with that, I'm going to stop here and open this up for questions. That anybody who has a comment or a question, please feel free to raise your hand, turn your mic off, say whatever you'd like, add comments in the chat function. This is our time to hear what you all have to say. And I just want to reiterate, we have not designed anything yet. We're in the information gathering stage of doing research on other examples of meeting with the city to develop their program for what their space needs really are as we plan for a new 100-year facility. And so this is all feedback that's going to be really constructive for us. We want to hear what you have to say and what your ideas and thoughts are so that we can include that when we start designing. So I'll be quiet. James, you got a comment? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm speaking now as the immediate past president of the Willow Springs Homeowners Association. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the most desperate needs that we had as an association was meeting space. And with your goal, with your bullet point of reaching out and collaborating with neighborhoods, I think that nothing could be better than to incorporate meeting spaces of various sizes and shapes for homeowners associations. But there's always some problems with that. I think that one of the design considerations must be that those spaces are capable of staying open late when you shut the rest of the building down for the folks who work there. And I think that let's talk about or think about even some provision for bringing in refreshments and stuff like that. But meeting space is desperately needed by almost every homeowners association of our size that doesn't have its own clubhouse or meeting space. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. The library has some meeting spaces, and they close at 8 o'clock. And if you want people who work to come to your meetings, you're going to have to stay open later than that. And that's my big agenda issue.
I think that's a great comment, valid suggestion. And I appreciate you bringing that up so that we can factor that in.
Good, thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Who else? Does anybody else have anything that we can talk about, share, or you'd like to ask? This we really want to keep this open to everybody who's taken the time to attend. This is not just for us to talk to you, but we're really interested and anxious to hear what everyone else thinks, and if you have concerns or you're excited about something, we want to hear about all of that.
Matt, a couple of thoughts. Hello, everyone, too, by the way. Hope everyone's doing well. The open area outside the BOMA chamber right now, I feel like is used a lot and you mentioned it, I think when you were talking about Boston, about folks waiting until their items on the agenda and congregating. And so I don't know, design wise, thinking about that and how, if you've ever been to a BOMA meeting and then, half the room gets up and leaves when their agenda is on or off the meeting, it's kind of distracting. And not that it's going to happen. There's no doubt about it, but I don't know, designing something that's welcoming and people feel comfortable doing that, and people feel comfortable waiting so that they are more apt to come and speak, and then enough exits so that it's not also equally as awkward to leave, and it doesn't disrupt flow. So that was one thing. And the other thing was construction type. I don't know, we've seen in my industry a lot of frame buildings going up, and something of substance like this. Just curious what the thoughts are of that. I don't know if frame makes a lot of, there's just a lot of challenges. This is going to be a building for a long time. And so, absolutely. You don't have to answer that. Costs associated with the different types, but as much of this as we can make not frame and do it economically, to me makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, we'll start exploring that a little bit in some of the master plan ideas, and then certainly as we start digging into the schematic design next year. But we're gonna, it's definitely a goal for this to be another 100-year building. It's got to be solid. It's got to be safe, and it's got to be flexible so that it can grow as the city's services grow and the population grows. But your point on the lobby is one that we've had a lot of discussions about, and I think that's a unanimous agreement with. We've talked about the ability of potentially controlling sound and having so that when the doors open, you don't hear everybody talking, and maybe there's some TVs out in the lobby. You might have a vestibule that helps with that transition. And so knowing that function is important to others as well, we definitely want to hear that feedback. So thank you. Let's see, I think Chris had a comment in the chat about the size of the building. That's part of what we are determining in this first phase and going through the programming. We're identifying what all of the needs are, what the growth expectations are for the next 20 years or so, what kinds of spaces we're going to need for the city to provide their services now that we'll have a clean slate in a building that's really designed to be a cutting edge city hall on the interior while fitting into the character of downtown Franklin on the exterior. So we don't have a firm definition of that. It will be multi-story rather than one story, because I think that's more in keeping with downtown Franklin. And then at the size relative to the footprint, knowing where we have an existing site and we're framed between the square, 3rd Avenue, and the parking garage, is going to start determining how big that footprint is as we go multi-story. So And Roger had a comment about nonprofits need a place to meet too. I think that falls right in with James' comment on the homeowners associations and some of those organizations. There's often a lot of need for, downtown Franklin doesn't have many big spaces for people to meet unless you're going to use the theater or potentially the public room at the police headquarters building. But there's City Hall is a great home to provide that interaction and connectivity with the citizens. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide here. If you have additional questions about these thoughts, please continue to add them to the chat function, and we can talk about them when we pause again as well. We can step back if we need to. But let me keep moving in the interest of time so that we get through all of the topics we want to discuss tonight. As we've established some of the goals for a master plan, historic context is obviously a big one. Given our site, given the character of downtown Franklin, this quadrant of the square is the one that doesn't have the same history that most of Main Street has. It's the buildings that have been there have changed over time. Historically, DT Crockett's grocery store was on the corner, had groceries and coal. Wagner had a laundry building. The public auction house was here. Along 3rd Avenue, we found some of these old photos of the livery stables, which I have always consciously thought of livery stables more as the barns you see closer to Leaper's Fort than such a brick urban structure. We thought this was really kind of interesting. And then there were 2 other stables on Main Street as well that emulated some of this architecture with the large arches where you could literally drive your horse and buggy in and park them like a parking garage when you came to town to do your business. The other shops kind of lined 3rd Avenue right there. This is right behind where Wagner's store is on 3rd Avenue, was where this photo was taken. There's a historic garden where the community garden that Dr. D.B. Cliff had started and maintained for years for downtown Franklin, right on 2nd Avenue. We've heard anecdotally, we don't have hard historic evidence of it, but that there was a water trough on the corner here, which makes sense with the blacksmith shop that used to also be on the corner. And the fact that 3rd Avenue was a gateway, just like it is now, into downtown Franklin, that this really became the crossroads of 3rd and Main, where people rode in, tied their horses up, had their horses reshoed, and they would stop and chat with their neighbors before going out to do other business on Main Street. And then I'm sure some of you may remember, and a lot of you have at least heard the stories of the Pie Wagon that at one point was on 3rd Avenue next to the courthouse before moving over to the northwest corner of the square, and was always a community icon that people came downtown to buy their pies. So we talk about site context of downtown. The square and the geometry of the square is obviously very important. We have the courthouse and what our relationship is going to be to that historic structure relative to scale, placement, and character. We want the City Hall to be welcoming to all of its visitors. The original City Hall was on the opposite corner, over in this corner, the northeast corner of the square. And in fact, if you look at those buildings now, if you haven't seen it before, there's still a stone marker in the brick that says city offices on it. That was this building right here. That sign is still there, though this building has been painted white recently. So there were a handful of policemen and a fire truck there. The fire truck parked here and had its own arched entrance, a little bit reminiscent of the stables that we saw. So we're seeing some repeated themes there, but the entrance to City Hall was on the square historically. And we think that's an important note. This 306 Public Square also shows the character of one of those arches. However, it's been constructed in such a manner that it really creates the entrance to the building. I don't believe this was ever a stable, but that same geometry and proportion of these arches with an entrance and a transom is evident in some of the other buildings that you see. You can see it at Binks downtown now next to the theater, and the Mellow Mushroom building as well. Those are some other examples. As the city operations are obviously going to be key to this building. It's got to function as a city hall, not just look like a pretty building outside. It's got to be safe and secure, promoting building occupant health and well-being. I think daylight and security, how we handle the entrances are all going to be very important characteristics. It's got to serve the citizens with improved operational efficiency and enhanced citizen interaction. When you look at examples of knowing where to go and how we might be able to connect some of these easy spaces for wayfinding, but also the function that you need. So it's obvious where to go for you to be able to do your business, get into City Hall, get out if you've got other things to do, make it obvious. We want to be flexible for the future. We want to think about the different ways and different spaces can be used for meeting spaces, for connecting and knowing what's going on in City Hall, but still maintaining some privacy where needed and acoustic separation. But we want to try and connect people to the citizens that they serve. The boardroom flexibility is going to be a big design factor. How we create the dais for the aldermen, how we provide support spaces for the staff that contribute to those meetings and sometimes have issues to report on, where the citizens sit. Do we have open space in the front that some of this furniture might be able to move out for different things that could either be held in the boardroom or different kinds of presentations for meetings that are held there. And thinking about how City Hall maintains its security but doesn't become a fortress. You know, how do we provide a welcoming information desk and security so that you don't really feel like you're going into someplace that's really a fortress and not very welcoming. We want to keep that open and look at how some of those spaces might serve multiple functions, but still maintain that flexibility. We've talked about community amenities and other things that might be important. Streetscape is something we're all familiar with in downtown Franklin because we've been working through that systematically on some of the different streets over the last decade or so. We've talked about parks, outdoor open spaces. The square is obviously an open space that we have, but how do we use it? Are there opportunities for other outdoor space that might facilitate different interactions with citizens, with visitors, that might serve as breakout spaces, might be an opportunity for some public art, or just help add to the character and the streetscape of downtown Franklin. Looking at how the lobby space might not just be an empty wide corridor like it is now, but a space that you have some place to wait for a meeting, or if there's a line to pay your bill or apply for a permit, it's a comfortable setting and you don't mind waiting. Can you be connected on Wi-Fi so you can do some things while you're waiting for something to happen, and still know where you are in City Hall? We're exploring obviously new parking garages and even subgrade parking. Parking's always an issue in downtown Franklin, and a big topic of discussion of how to handle that to provide safe, secure parking for city staff, but also play a role in downtown Franklin where parking needs go up every week because people want to come downtown, which that's a great thing. We want to support that. So with that, I'm going to pause here. That's a lot of different kinds of topics that all speak to downtown Franklin and how City Hall might support some of these goals, but y'all may agree or disagree with some of those. So we'd like to hear your comments and feedback. It's okay. There's no wrong comments, no bad feedback.
Hi, Matt. Hello, everyone. My name is Susan Clark, and I'm just here as an interested Franklin person. Grew
Great.
up here and adore the street and everything about our city. Just wanted to comment that I absolutely love the openness of those other City Hall examples. And I think that we have a really fun, unique way to welcome everyone in by that space on the public square. And I found it especially endearing this week to watch the video about the history of the building and to know that you might remember, those of you that have seen it, the picture of the horse at the trough.
Mhm.
One of the things that I imagined in this space may be a water feature and a park-like landscaped entrance to that part of the building. And when I saw the video, I thought, oh, how wonderful would it be if we could actually have that water feature maybe as a way to fill up everyone's water bottles walking along the street, but to replicate somehow that old horse's trough kind of design to it.
Right.
Among other things, I'm enjoying the daydreaming as we go along. So just wanted to add those 2 cents.
That's
Thank
great. Well, be sure to continue to share those visions that you're having in your dreams.
You got
And thank you for the feedback. That's all really helpful. We see a lot of those pictures, but we don't know how everybody else reacts to them. And so some might perceive them as good and some bad or indifferent. And so it really helps to hear your thoughts. And that goes for everybody. So thanks, Susan. Hi, Mindy. I saw your face.
Hey there. How are you? Can you hear me, Matt?
I can hear you fine. Yeah. What
Okay.
do you have for us?
Well, I really, as we reemerge from the COVID isolation, I do think that having a space where 50 to 100 citizens can meet and a space that can be scheduled with good technology is a really important component to making this a public space. I think
Okay.
that's really important.
Great.
We have accessed, Franklin Amaro has accessed the training room several times, and the city is a great partner. But you also, maybe rather than provide that office space, it's about a space that nonprofits can access to have board meetings or have events, and that could be really important.
Mm-hmm.
I also feel that the public restrooms really need to be visibly identified and prevalent off the square where people are walking, because I've been here a long, long time, and how many times have I provided direction to the restroom? And it's a big deal, as our tourism can tell you, that it's a very important thing that people have access to those restrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that is part of a more public space that is facing the square and a place where people can stop and rest and take a respite on that square.
Sure. Oh, you're not the first person to mention that the value of the current public restrooms not completely going away.
Yeah. Well,
a new facility.
they're the only ones we have currently. So I
Right.
think that's important. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you. We appreciate the feedback.
I would comment on Susan, to piggyback on Susan. I do think that kind of the water trough, the park light. I see that here with the Paley Park, New York, on the slide. It seems more appropriate probably on 3rd Avenue than maybe on the square. I don't know what others feel. The square is kind of sacred, it feels like, and if you start altering that, and I've heard people talk about moving the front building line to the original, to where like 231 did, to move out to the original square. My thoughts are protect the character of the square and build something with design that faces the square that really you're not going to see anywhere else. Like, let's create something that people in other cities will say, we could do it like this. and let our city hall design on the square be the example, it's going to be very unique because Franklin is unique. And so you have the opportunity to build a nondescript public building, or the ability, something that we want to preserve 100 years from now. Really, you say 100-year lifespan, but if builders who built our downtown felt that way, I mean, they may not have thought past 100 years, but we're preserving things they built 100 years ago. And it would be, I think it's incumbent upon us to think about building something that 100 years from now, they will want to preserve because of its character. And so, especially on the square. Now, 3rd Avenue down, I mean, it's kind of a blank slate. I mean, there's lots of, but I know that folks will probably agree that square, it's a really special place and special time. This building to do something really great.
Absolutely.
And someone put in the chat about the performance area. The way the City Hall is set up there on the square as it relates to the 231 Public Square building, I mean, it is already a stage area, very open availability area, and you can build off that. But I think it's important to understand that we also make that more accessible and available to organizations, and without having to bring in tons of equipment and tons of expense, that is a place that performance can happen in our community, and that's public art and public performance, and that's important.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thank y'all. Please keep those comments coming in the chat box. And again, I'm going to go ahead and move on to keep things going, to keep us on schedule. But by all means, but don't stop sharing ideas and feedback by any stretch. As we talk about supporting uses in the downtown area, and that some of this, you're going to start seeing some overlap in what we've talked about before, but it's a little bit more detailed examples of these things. We want to know what types of supporting uses you all might envision. We've heard positive and negative feedback on some ideas that have been shared so far. And so we're continually asking and trying to understand and gather that feedback. But Mindy just touched on gatherings, events, fairs, and festivals. I mean, the Main Street Festival is obviously one of the biggest, and the Dickens Festival that happen downtown on an annual basis. Performances, the steps in front of the City Hall entrance on the square are really where that stage happens predominantly, unless it's off of Main Street on the other streets that cross over. Gardens, parks, and plazas. We saw the historic community garden that Dr. Clifford started. The square is a great plaza. We've talked about creating courtyards for spaces that provide some relief off of potentially off of 3rd Avenue or around the building. Visitor information, historic displays like the Mount Pleasant example, incubator space for small community organizations or businesses potentially could be an opportunity that, even if that becomes future growth space for the city offices, is there a role for that in the building? Community meeting space we talked about earlier, and other potential commercial uses, whether it's something like a coffee shop or other retail in the downtown fabric. And I'm bringing all those up as things that we've heard some feedback on before to solicit more feedback, not pushing them as all things that are definitely going to be included in City Hall. So, sorry, I should have flipped to this one as we were talking a little further. With the outdoor spaces, we've talked about ways to activate the alley and bring some of that streetscape. If you think about the space between the current City Hall and the 2nd Avenue garage, we can make that a more inviting space so that it's not just so back of house, utilitarian. We've talked about pocket parks around the building, whether they be Third Avenue or on the south end of the building, as we transition into the residential neighborhood. We're looking at roof spaces with a multi-story building and how we break up the massing and might be able to utilize some of the outdoor spaces from the different levels of the roofs of the building. And looking at the square, the plaza. This is, we touched on Boston City Hall and their massive renovation of their City Hall Plaza. This is an example of some of what they've done to bring more greenery in, signage, and activate the spaces for both people exercising, strolling, coming to meetings, and families. I think I jumped one too far there. I'm going to scroll back and pause here because these are a lot of things to talk about. And I overlooked, I think Ernie had a comment and concern about how much space we might plan to accommodate not-for-profits in the City Hall. And it's one of those examples of where we really do want feedback. If that might start to create more demand than the city should be responsible for trying to meet. So this could be a question of size and scale of space, meeting space. But we'd like to hear your feedback on some of these different kinds of ideas with the public art and corridors, the plazas, incubator space, parks, and green roofs.
Well, I do think that with the addition of the U.S. Colored Troops statue in front of the courthouse, it's going to open up and add public art in a way that is not prevalent in the square. And as we continue to tell the fuller story, is there more art, or is there a mural or something that could be constructed that would add public art overall to this concept?
Great. I think there's a lot of different opportunities and interpretations of what public art and performance art can be and how it gets integrated into the architecture or the streetscape. We've talked about how that art might rotate and change over time, and there might be some permanent art installations like the statue in the square. There may be a mix of the two that happens to support our local art community.
May I speak to your bullet point on incubator space?
Yes, sir.
I caution that, not because of lack of support for incubators, but we do have, the chamber is planning to provide that here downtown at the Berry House. So I would question the duplication of locations for that. And I also want to ask, what is envisioned in your comments relative to commercial uses?
Well, right now it's a little bit of a catch-all. We're looking for feedback on any commercial spaces that might be seen favorably or that we don't want to see. We may want them on Main Street, but we may not want that as part of City Hall. We've gotten some of that feedback relative to retail and some other discussions, Ernie, that maybe retail doesn't have a place in City Hall.
I would comment that it does not. Now, at one time, as a community, we considered having smaller street front commercial spaces backed up into our parking garages. And I can understand that concept, but it does not need to commingle with public spaces internally.
One comment we've received, which does a little bit of what you're saying, is how that might be integrated to help activate Third Avenue, but open to the street and really internally be separated from City Hall.
And
that's a good idea or a bad idea. in everybody's
Um,
minds.
Matt and Ernie, what I would say about is I understand the entrepreneur space on the Franklin Grove campus that
Mhm.
Williamson Inc. is going to do. This may be something more like a narrow gate foundation that's already graduated to being in retail from an entrepreneurial spirit, where someone bids for that space and they have a profit sharing or whatever that back to the city. But the concept is that it is about hospitality. I think it's a hospitality based organization and it benefits back to the city. Um, I mean, goodness gracious, let's not give away anything, but maybe it's a little node of the visitor center that is about hospitality, because it's just making that space accessible.
Mhm.
And so I mean, I do think it's about making it accessible. I would not like to see it become someplace other than just a place you could get a cup of coffee or a bottle of water or a little quick grab kind of thing
Mhm.
that took away from the sit downs or any other aspect of what goes on in our community.
Yep.
Because I do think that Williamson Inc.'s property at Franklin Grove is more about helping someone launch and start from a seed. And this is more about someone who has come from the seed, and maybe it's a competitive space. I don't know. So it's an interesting idea.
Well,
Well,
I think
that helps
uh,
me understand it. Thank you.
go ahead. And Mindy and Ernie, I think your feedback is part of what will shape whether this happens in some aspect or not. And so I want to keep those thoughts going. I do need to get kind of rolling back into the presentation a little bit, but I don't want to stop the thought process and the feedback from you all, because I think that level of detail will really help shape what we look at relative to these supporting uses. I also wanted to just note real quick that Kate made a comment about really liking the livery stables and potentially honoring that imagery in the brick structure with the multi-storage carriage house block, similar to the way Belle Mead's carriage house is done. So I just wanted to acknowledge her comment as well. But I'm going to move forward, but by all means, please keep this feedback coming. I just don't want to hold everybody over time too much. As we talk about architectural style a little bit, we touched on the livery stables, and here's some of the other images of the other stables that were on East Main Street with the same large arches. This one's a little bit more of a block, but still much more of an urban structure. The 306 building in the northwest corner, this is a more historic photo, pulling that in. And then even some of the older buildings along Main Street that had the arched punched opening windows. Those punched window openings are an important character statement as opposed to big glass boxes in our context of downtown. So we think there's something to pay attention to there. Having lost the stables, we lost the grandness of these kinds of openings. So we wanted to share that in our historic findings to get some of the feedback that y'all have been great about sharing already tonight on this. When we talk about materials and detailing of the buildings, we have a lot of variation, but a very consistent character downtown. Some of that is due to the age and the time period that much of our construction took place. But our buildings are 2 and 3 stories predominantly. We have some variation in how the parapet caps are treated with brackets that project forward, or parapets that step up and have a cap with the stone and some ornament in them. We have these large brackets and then smaller pairs of brackets, arched windows again. We have some front arcade porch elements on some of the buildings. 231 pulled in some of the canopies that we see to help establish this kind of scale and shelter at the entrances and define where the entrance is to the buildings. Here you see some of the brick corbelling like we saw in the stables, the mix of brick and stone like you see in a couple of these different buildings, whether it's in the sills or in the caps, how the windows are treated. All of these buildings have a vertical rhythm and a bay to them that really helps to set the rhythm of the streets. And then a variation in the copings and cornices as well, where material changes. It's almost a dormer window treatment here. And then even in the brickwork itself, without changing materials, we do change the planes and create elements of relief and different shapes of the masonry to create some of that character. As we talk about style a little bit, as we mentioned early on, there's not a lot of new city halls built in historic contexts, and city halls tend to be built as 50 to 100-year buildings. So they're not built like office buildings in terms of the frequency and repetition of them. Alexandria, Virginia has a historic city hall structure. It has grand steps and a plaza and water feature in the foreground. In some ways, this is reminiscent of our square and our steps that we have to the entrance. It's a little bit different proportion and geometry in the setting, but there are some similarities to this entry concept. Mount Pleasant City Hall, while Mount Pleasant does have a historic village, it has a little bit more suburban city hall. It drew on some of the inspiration of their historic village with the vertical rhythm of their older structures. It does have some light treatments for their sustainability functions to create light shelves and draw light inside. It created a modern interpretation of a porch on the end of the building here with some outdoor space that can be used as meeting space and also help provide some shade on the larger open windows. In Germany, this is an example. We've started to talk about this being a civic structure and not a Main Street mixed-use retail structure. So what does it mean for this to be a city hall, and what is the civic presence that it needs to have so it doesn't get confused with the shops and doesn't compete with the courthouse? The courthouse has a very stately presence that's much more civic and very traditional. Do we want to introduce some classical elements that might be historic but create a little bit more of a civic presence? And then we've found these two case study examples of new buildings built in similar historic contexts that had some direct elements that we thought were applicable to our site. The Daxton Hotel in Birmingham, Michigan has a very strong base, middle, and top, which is one of our design characteristics that we emphasize in the downtown neighborhood district. We could really see this kind of edge lining 3rd Avenue with some of the transparency and the base. And if we were to have certainly a main entrance or multiple entrances, depending on what services and functions are served at the ground level, the upper floors break up the massing once you get above that base and create a rooftop courtyard. And then there's additional rooftop space where the top steps back even further to break up the massing. In Bloomfield or Montclair, New Jersey, we have another similar structure that still has that streetscape rhythm with the vertical base. It brings in the brick and the stone, has a base similar to Daxton, but they really anchored the corner here by creating this very strong reveal element so that this tends to almost recall the grocery store and laundry building that anchored that corner across from the courthouse at one point. Both this one, similar to the Daxton, steps back at the top, creates some rooftop space. I think this is a little bit more modern at the top than we would expect to see in downtown Franklin, and the scale is a little bit taller. But this sort of rhythm, the change in materials and character how it anchors the corner, and really both of them address the streetscape better from an architectural standpoint, were elements that we thought spoke to our site. So we wanted to open that up to feedback. And I realize we only have a few minutes left, so I don't want to cut people off. That's really the topics that we wanted to talk about. Before we take the last comments, just in case anybody has to leave, the project does have its own website where information and events for additional meetings and reports are going to be shared. CompleteTheSquare.com. You all feel free to click in there. There's opportunities to submit additional comments and feedback through the website. So if you didn't get a chance to say something or put something in the chat box tonight, or you think of something tomorrow, please go to the website, and we are going to keep submitting feedback, as you saw from the timeline, or taking feedback through the fall. And we're going to have another round of public engagement. So we really want to continue to hear from you over the next several months. So
Matt, I think you were with us when we went to Mount Pleasant and Charleston for a Vision City visit. And what I would say is, while I would not want, their building is too modern, I do think the inclusion of a front porch is a really significant and positive thing, but in no way would I want it to be used in a way that could detract from what has been done to tell the fuller story of our square. It could be a place that people could sit and moderate and understand the process. And funny, this afternoon, a couple times today, I was driving through the square, and I just noticed that people were almost reverential in reading the markers there and everything. And I think that it's a place that people could start almost. Maybe that's a place people could start.
So that's a great idea, Mindy. Yeah, thank you.
I don't envy your job, Matt.
I'm a glutton for punishment. I love this stuff. This is our backyard, so we feel like, you know, we have an extra responsibility here. You know,
and just to comment on the photos seen here, I mean, my eyes drawn very to the Montclair, New Jersey, but because I think it has I know in our standards, you know, this is a huge, I'm looking at an old Sanborn map from 1920 of the square of this property, which I'd like to show you because that might give some more insights.
Yep.
But in how it's broken up and how it's set back, there's different setbacks on 3rd Avenue of the different houses, and so when the character of that street is what was disrupted with the current City Hall building, and it's very important that we don't disrupt it again. And whatever is created reverts back to that community type feel. And I think the setbacks on 3rd Avenue, like a lot of these don't show that, but that's going to be very important. It's for it to feel like it's not just this massive, and I know there's architectural ways to do it, but this massive building, that is built there. And so however we can build that character and setbacks and different materials, and that's why my eye is drawn, I think, maybe to the bottom right. But it's none of these, you can show no picture that I think will end up what is right for Franklin.
Right. We're looking for ideas to share to get that kind of feedback, so that we have some starting points of this is doing what we think we want to do in Franklin, but there's no question this needs to be a unique facility for the city of Franklin and reflect the people and the staff that serve all the citizens here. So, does anybody else have any other additional comments? I'm sorry we sort of squeezed this last bit here right up against the end of the night.
Matt, maybe if it's okay with you and everybody, I'll just wrap up. If I could. And again, thank you, Matt. And this is a huge opportunity for our community, and more so an exciting opportunity. And we are very intentional of how we're engaging the community and staff, and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, Historic Zoning Commission, the entire community, in how we walk through this initial fact-finding phase. And then later this year, towards the end of the year, right after the first of the year, we'll be approaching the board with a master planning concept that really talks about the size, the massing, how the site should be laid out. Not any schematic designs. That will be the second phase and take us through 2022. So any input you have has been discussed. You can feel free to share with myself. I know many of us know each other here. Kelly Dannensfelser, Joe Marlowe, we're here to listen and to take any information you have, so we put it all together as these conversations continue. One last favor, as you talk to friends, your business associates, please invite them to become engaged. The conversation will ensure that the redevelopment of this site on Franklin's historic square will be truly something special. So the more input, the better. Thank you for joining us. And we have on our website, Complete the Square, that you can access for up-to-date messages, but just reach out and ask questions if you ever have one. Thanks again.